is that collaborative interactive learning isn't a teaching or learning style, it's a lifestyle. And it's a matter of how you involve yourself in wherever you are, how much you get out of it, and how much other people get out of it as a result of what you contribute. So when I started teaching, when I interned with 8 different teachers because I did not want to be blocked into just one subject area. That could have been my downfall, but I have really enjoyed change, not necessarily always imposed by myself, sometimes imposed from the outside, but one of my fallback supports for myself is I chose this life for a reason, so what is it I'm supposed to learn from this? And when things are worst in my life, that's what I've used to kind of turn it around and see, okay, what is it that I can gain from this? What can I offer to other people? So, as Shauna mentioned, the highlight of my career was working with the teen moms at Belfort. And I learned so much in the 12 years that I was there that I couldn't even begin to categorize that in this session, but I'll offer some input from students as well as from myself. So as I was trying to decide what materials could I bring and how much should I involve you in actually doing a collaborative interactive experience while we're sitting here, if you think about your own career and your own life, how many changes have you undergone? How many of them did you have a choice in? Free choice, or were there choices but you didn't see them at the time? One of my other beliefs is that we all do the best we can every moment, every day. Sometimes we're wishing we could have done a whole lot better, but I don't think it's possible for us to choose to do less than we can. If we're choosing less than we think is possible, it's because that's all we can do at that moment or that day. So I use that as my means of dealing with students who, if I start at the end of my career with the teen moms, they ranged in age from 14 to 22. If they turned 22 during a semester, they got to finish that semester. If they were 22 and wanted to come to the school, they weren't allowed to. They had to go to an adult school through SIAS to complete the grade 12. Many of the students had had no success in school before. Many had quit. One student had quit in grade 6. And so it was amazing to me how their lives turned around. They described, they would say, other people thought it was just terrible that I got pregnant and had a baby, but actually that baby saved my life. That's how they saw it, and that's how they made it work at school. They turned their lives around, they worked like crazy, they got scholarships, they've accomplished all kinds of things that one student who graduated in June, and I went to her graduation, I said to her, do you remember when you told me when you first came to the school that you couldn't learn? And she said, yes, I do. I said, so how come you just got a scholarship then? So for her, I was amazed that she actually remembered telling me that, but I was talking to her about doing an assignment, and she said, no, Denise, I just can't learn. I said, well, I have a feeling we can figure something out that will work for you. So for each, I went from, so I'll recap, from the beginning of my career when I was interning, one of the teachers that I worked with said, I have never in my life seen such detailed lesson plans as you create. I went from that to teaching for the last 12 years, where it was like being in a canoe with paddles and having 30 or more people around me, and I was supposed to stay afloat and keep a direction and keep all of them afloat at the same time. So I would have to adjust everything all the time, and I was fine with that. I loved it. So I can't believe that that transformation took place in my career from having to have everything absolutely laid out like all of the words and all of the actions for a movie or for a play. Went from that to being able to just go with the flow and help the students achieve what they could. So if I start at the beginning of what might be education in Saskatchewan of the sort that we have, this is one of, I think, 7 or 8 books that actually belong to my grandmother. She graduated from school in Ontario and went to normal school and moved to, which was for to become a teacher. She moved to Saskatchewan when she was 16, I think, to get away from her family. She had a sister who was married here in Saskatchewan. And this was one of her books. So it's called The New Teachers and Pupils Cyclopedia. And I'll just pass this over and you can have a look at it. So going from that as a beginning, just symbolically, of where education has come from, this is, The Mindful Brain is one of the books that I selected to bring as well. Just because there has been such a shift in education, but that shift changes at any given point. You can have stuff from a book that was written in the early 1900s all the way up to today. And the shock for me with my thesis and my research, I did action research, and it was called Collaborative Interactive, with grade 10 students. And it was at Winston Knoll in the first year of the school. And I had 45, between 45 and 50 students on alternate days, and the computer labs had only 28 machines, and maybe 10 to 15 of them would work on any given day, because they also had this philosophy in the school, which was make it different, do it differently, find some creative way to do it. So that meant the kids could go on the computers and they could have access to anything, and they could immobilize the computers in about 30 seconds or less. So on any given day, I might have 10 machines, 25 or 30 students, and I was supposed to be teaching them information processing. So the way that the whole research project got approached was, I said to the students who ranged in ability regarding computers, from those who were probably as capable as our computer technicians, to those who absolutely hated computers and didn't even want to look at them. So I set this up at the beginning of the school year to say, we're all new here, we don't know how this works, we're going to figure it out, and we're going to figure it out together. So we set this up so that the first half of the year on alternate days was going to be having their physical and mechanical skills on the computers all raised to at least the same level, with the promise that on the beginning of semester 2, they would have all kinds of involvement. And they would have lots of choice about what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. So those who were the computer, what you might call the computer nerds, they said, okay, I can handle this for half a year if I've got the promise of doing brand new things in the second semester. So I got buy-in from them that way. This is a gift I got from one of the boys who was in the class. There were grade 11 and 12 boys in successive years after that. This is a gift that he gave me, which I still have. He actually came to the school I was in as a vice principal and brought me this gift and talked to me about how important he found the class that he'd been in with me. So I had all kinds of rewards like that. Now I'm just going to talk through these things because this is like collaborative and interactive and floating and keeping everybody else afloat at the same time. I used the same method teaching native studies. And this one is Christopher Columbus, Explorer in the New World. This one is a photocopy that a student brought me that's called Canadian Holocaust, the story of a national crime. And it's kind of ironic to have both of these in one class. But this is the range of experience that students had, and it was a real honor for me to have First Nations students say to me, one of the best things I learned about this was my culture and about my family. Like, that really shocked me, but part of it was that their previous experience had not acknowledged anything of their family history or their cultural history. So one student brought me this towards the end of the year, and she said, my family wants you to have this. And I said, well, this looks to me like something that you would want to have, your family would want to keep. She said, nope, they don't want it. And I said, well, if they change their minds, you tell them they can come and get it. This is a book. Are any of you familiar with this book? It was written by a United Church minister, and he took statements from all people who were willing to come and talk to him. It was mainly about BC, but not entirely. and it was about the really shocking and horrific things that were done by governments and churches and other organizations in Canada. And so I went through that book and I picked out things girls could research or look at and figure out what they wanted to do with it, but I didn't pick out the most horrific things because those girls, 85% of them were in abusive relationships, many had addiction issues, they didn't need additional pain put in front of them. So some of the students, the rule I gave them was, if I give you an assignment and it causes you problems, you don't know how to do it, or it's causing you stress, you say to me, Denise, I really can't do this assignment, it's too stressful for me. And I will say, okay, let's find something else to do. So they knew that if whatever I gave them, because how would I know whether something I give them is going to cause them trauma? Then they were comfortable to tell me what they needed instead. So it went collaboratively from working in a computer lab with students in grade 10 who were willing and happy to work with other people, who, when I would have what we call chat sessions, but actually were opportunities for me to find out from them exactly where they were at, what they learned. It was part of the whole action research thing. They would say, we actually talk about this with our friends. And I said, why would you do that? And they said, because we chose it. It's ours. So that whole thing about choice that I mentioned at the beginning is really an amazingly powerful thing. If people have a sense that they have a choice about it, it's empowering. If somebody's enforcing a choice on either you or me or the students, then they feel disempowered. So I think that's one of the main elements of collaborative interactive. So after 2 weeks of having the students, and this is the formal research part, having the students choose what topics they were going to work with, who they were going to work with, how they were going to approach it, because the assignment was they would work together and prepare for 2 weeks to do a presentation for 3 days. And it was on some topic associated with computers. After 2 weeks, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be a complete disaster. These kids are not getting anything done. I've got to do something about this. And before I finished my panic attack that evening, I thought, I promised them we would make decisions together. So I can't just go in there tomorrow and say, okay, sorry, I lied. You're not going to get to make choices anymore. I'm taking over. So I went in the next morning and I told them that. I said, I hit the panic button last night. I'm looking at this and saying, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. Nobody's going to get anything done this year. So then I remembered I promised that we were going to make joint decisions. So now, tell me how we're going to fix it. And I just shut up and let them talk. I couldn't believe the answers they came up with. And after I completed my research and this is my thesis and then the subsequent report that we had published, I couldn't believe I'd actually chosen to do that with grade 10s. It was like, oh, what was I thinking? Like, grade 10s are not seen as the most mature in the school. They're kind of adjusting still from elementary school, kind of have an idea that someday they might graduate. But those kids just loved it. And I will run into students just in this last year in the gym and recognize this young woman. And I thought, I said to her, where do I know you from? She said, I was in your entrepreneurship class. And she said, I have my own business. And I have my own business because I was in that class. She said, I loved it. It was the best thing ever. And so I'm thinking, wow, well, okay, that sounds good. And so she's actually an EMT, and she has 2 kids, and she's taking university classes. And so when I was finishing off my initial degree, I worked on a research project in the summer, and the intent was to figure out what caused people to choose their careers. And so we interviewed people all over southern Saskatchewan. And one of the conclusions of that was very often it was a special project or a class or an individual person in school that caused the person to choose their career. And so time and again, I'd be talking to people who've been in their careers for many, many years, and they'd say, well, the reason I chose this is because of an assignment I had. And I'm thinking, how could an assignment be that powerful? But when people are engaged in it, when you ask them, what do you think about this? How can this happen? And you allow them to choose to work with whomever, it's a scary thing as a teacher because your job is to make sure the kids are successful. And if they're not, then that falls on your own shoulders. So it's a lot of risk taking, and one of the benefits of starting that process at Winston Knoll was the fact that the philosophy was do things differently. We want you to do that. So if you were in a school where that wasn't allowed, it would be pretty tough to be able to actually follow through on things like this. So, one of the students who actually graduated this year, that was in grade 11 a year ago, and I told the girls, I announced to them, I said, I'm going to be graduating with you. This was in the last week of May, or beginning of June, because I hadn't told them that I was going to retire. The students are very frequently there, more than 1 year, and so I didn't want that to become an issue of them being stressed or somehow affected by me retiring. So I didn't tell them until almost graduation time, and I said, I'm going to be graduating with you, and they looked at me like I'd lost it. And I said, well, actually, some people call it retirement, but I'm graduating from teaching. So then I got to be part of the graduation thing. So it was a lot of fun. It made it an easier thing for me to do in retiring because I loved what I was doing. But as people had said to me before, you'll know when the time is right to retire because things will shift in such a way that you know that this is the time to move on and do something else, and that had happened. But this box is one that a student made. She tried to figure out what to give me as a gift, and she couldn't think of it, so she made one. So those were some of the gifts that I received from students psychologically as well as physically. Now, when it comes to actually coordinating these things, how would you choose? How would you set things up to evaluate students if you're leaving it open-ended? Any ideas?
I've established the assessment criteria with them.
So do you have any ideas of where you would start?
Probably just with the discussion in terms of what things they would expect to see across like a product, and then refine from there.
Okay, sounds good.
How do you do that without it being like a recipe?
Sorry?
Like, how do you do that without it being a recipe? So I'm teaching a 5th-year engineering class right now, and I didn't want to give them a prescriptive rubric because my experience is they just check mark everything, right? And I think that hinders their creativity. So what I did this year was I just said, well, if it's between this range, I think it's good. We have a discussion. I'm working with industry partners, so we're having a conversation after everything they submit. And if we deem it acceptable, they get the acceptable range of their grade, right? But some of them are struggling with that because they want that recipe. But I'm trying to say you don't have a recipe in real life typically, right? So how do you not do that in an academic setting because it's all about grades, and that's what the students really care about, and they want that recipe. So can you? Like, I don't know.
It's scary.
After this semester, yeah, it's scary because
It's scary for the teacher because you're responsible for their success.
For their learning.
And it's scary for the kids because they have to trust that you're not going to ship them somewhere off where they are failing and they were wanting to be successful.
Or change your mind, right?
Yeah,
So
like when I went in there and said to them, okay, I hit the panic button, but I decided that we've got to figure this out together.
Yeah.
It does take a lot of trust. And it's a process, and when I started, it was with 2 classes of students on alternate days, and initially I'd made the decision, logically to me, those who finished their assignments first, the process of completing their presentation first, would present first. No, sorry, I did that one. That's exactly what I had to do. I thought, logically, these are the topics you've got. This is the sequence that makes most sense. And I thought, okay, on day 2, one boy, there's a group of 4, 2 boys, 2 girls, and they all got to choose how many in the group and who they were working with. One boy came to me with all his transparencies done for the presentation. This was in day 2, and I thought, oh my God, like this is impressive. And I thought, all right, I think I'm gonna have to change my mind because the other students appear to be doing nothing. How am I going to get this group, because their topic is logically first, how am I gonna get them actually in order to do this when these guys, they got their documents ready on day 2. And in addition with that same group, that was the boy who was super organized. The other boy was just, he knew everything about computers. He was just the super best, he was at the top. And then there were 2 girls in the class who I'd only seen them in what could be called a social butterfly settings, and I thought, this is gonna be a disaster. Like, how is this, they're gonna hate each other by the time they're done, because I expected it would take 4 people who were super, but like they were all in the same mindset. This has to be done, we gotta get it done this way, and who's gonna do what, and it's all done in day 2. Whereas one guy was like that, and the other 3 were entirely different. I had the students mark themselves, and mark each other, and I marked them. I marked them on the basis of what I observed and what they were doing, and I also marked them on how accurate they were in their own evaluation, because some of them were really hard on themselves. They deserved a 10 out of 10, and they'd give themselves like a 6 or a 7. So I'd say, by my observation, you deserve a 10. You gave yourself a 6, so I'm giving you an 8 on your accuracy. So I would encourage them to be more accurate about how they were evaluating themselves. Those 4 students in that group blew me away when I saw their evaluations of each other, because the strengths those girls had were communication. They knew what would interest the students in that class. They knew how to present stuff and what they needed to do for those 3 class periods to engage everybody in the class, and I thought, and they rated each other really highly and had justifications for why those people deserved those kinds of marks, and they were all valid. I, as a teacher, would never have observed that on my own. I would never have known the conversations they were having and how much they valued each other's strengths. So it showed me how inaccurate my own evaluations could be of people if I don't have the information that validates what's going on. So having the students participate in that and inform me was really helpful. So I got to the point where at the end of the period, they went up on the board, they put their name down, they put their mark every single day. And they'd comment on each other's marks if somebody was being inaccurate. Like they didn't go up there and give each of them give themselves 10 out of 10 because they had a whole sense of ownership on it, and it was valid to them, and they were not going to have this minimized.
So you did that together with everyone seeing
Yeah.
that, okay?
Yeah. And I'll just tell you the story at the end of that semester. There were 2 boys who definitely did not fit in the category of organized. They didn't fit in the category of organized and keen. They were the slackers who were laying on the floor or on the registers or something while the other members of their group, their initial group, were working. The other group members kicked them out. They said, forget it, you guys aren't working, we don't want you anymore. They presented last because, of course, they were last to be completed in their whole process. And they walked into the classroom, and they came over to me where I was sitting, and they said, would you please photocopy these handouts? I'm not surprised. Like, they should have given them to me the day before. All the class members were sitting there waiting for them to start, and they'd given me the stuff to go copy. And in that school, I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's these glass walls between the classrooms. So I went to the teacher next door and I said, would you please keep an eye on these guys while I go and photocopy this stuff? And when I came back, these 2 boys were sitting on the floor in the hallway. And I said, you know, this doesn't look very good. How come you guys are out here? And they said, because they won't let us present. And I said, why would that be? And they said, because we were such jerks all semester. I had to laugh. I said, okay, well, I think if I talk to them, I'll convince them to let you present. So I don't know what went on in that classroom, but the teacher booted those 2 guys out in the hallway. I went in, and those kids looked like the typical Cheshire cat. They were just, you know, they were so happy they got even with these guys who tormented them while they were doing their presentations. I said, I think you guys can let them present now, right? And they said, yeah, we can do that. So they really did a good job. But in spite of the the irony of that, or the frustration of it as a teacher, to see those guys hardly do anything all year. They managed to pull off a really good presentation, and I'll bet they learned more than almost anybody else in the class. I don't know if they would ever have repeated what they did in that semester. So the type of learning that takes place is not where you have choices A, B, C, D, and check it off. It's give them a sheet of paper and say, tell me what you learned. And it's amazing what they come up with. And they can't fake it. Like, you can't fake something that you didn't learn. So they would write, and I had some that would get up to like 75 marks, because I literally put a check mark beside each point that they made. And so some of them would get 75, some would get like 15, and because some of them were more able to communicate in written form and others not. Bless you. So they would, what I also did was, if you've got a range of 75 to 14 on the exam, like obviously this is something you have to figure out how to deal with. So then what I did, I would have a category, here's the exam marks, and I put them all in. Then I'd look at all the other marks they had, because they had optional classes. They didn't all, or assignments, they didn't all have to do all of the assignments. So every student would have a certain, approximately the same number of marks, like say out of 500 or whatever. And if they had a bunch of assignments not done and they got 75 on their exam, I'd take this and I'd put it in the holes that they had in their assignments, and there was no loss of marks in the exam column. So this was kind of out of the box thinking, which may or may not be something that any individual might be comfortable with. But what I found was that I made all kinds of adaptations. In the last year when I was teaching Native Studies, I would have, let's say I'll just pick a number. I had 20 different assignments of a major sort. And so some students would choose 5 that were large assignments, some would choose 15 that were smaller. So they could choose the type of assignment that suited them, and they could look at that assignment and say, okay, well, what I'm going to do is such and such. I didn't say you have to do this, these are the questions, these are the answers. But that's a scary thing. When you consider what I've described as my first experience as an intern was having one of my supervising teachers say, I've never seen such detailed lesson plans in all my life, to someone who can float and find a balance and have the students involved and have them comfortable with it, and me comfortable with it. So what I'm hoping people can take from this is ideas on what you yourself might be able to come up with that would suit you. How, as you were proposing with that, the issue you have with students trying to come up with their own evaluation, especially as they get older, they're locked into, I have got to have a mark of such and such or my life's going to be a disaster. And therefore, they're thinking, okay, well, I have to figure out how I'm going to get that by what I choose for evaluation, whereas a younger kid is not hung up on those details.
I don't know if any other faculty is different, but engineering, they'll complain to the dean if, like, this was an ad hoc class, and then you have to kind of defend that ad hocness to the dean, you know, so, because they'll do that, right?
Yeah.
So then, it is everything you say, it's scary, but at the same time, like, how do you prepare these folks for life outside, right?
Right. Once I finished my research with the first group, in subsequent years, the following 4 years that I was there, I did all of the action research stuff, like the collaborative interactive, with entrepreneurship students. And I, like, even just reviewing here what I had done with those students still blows me away. It's like, how could those kids have actually done these things? So what they did was, the school had a portion set aside for a daycare. And for 2 years, nothing had happened because there was this public image of a daycare in a school, and you know, who wants to have that there? This is embarrassing or whatever, and no one would take it on. So the principal at the time said, well, we still don't have a daycare. Maybe you guys could see what you can do about that. So I contacted the director of the Regina Community Clinic, who had been given the responsibility of setting that daycare up. And his name was Vic Heward. Students could do this, but you can. This was the beginning of September, and we had that daycare open February 1st for the new semester. And it went from 0 to completely open and functioning in that time frame. Those kids were completely involved with it. It just, like, if you open the doors for them, what they can accomplish is endless. It's just beyond what you would ever expect. So when we set out as teachers to say, this is what I expect, well, you know what? That may be a whole lot less than they can accomplish if you throw choice in there to say, how can you do this? What do you think we could do? And so like these are some of the questions I just had them start with individually, because if you have a group of people, some will speak and some won't. You don't want those who are quiet to have all their ideas just under the table and not having buy-in. So I would have them just write 3 sentences each on these topics. How should we organize our semester? That was the first one. And what projects should we do and why? And what departments and why? As in, how are we going to organize the inside part of this? What strengths would help you in that particular group or project? And what help do you need? So each semester I would shift it just sort of based on the kind of communication that was going on in the class. Having options, I think, is one of the most powerful things that we can have as a human being. And if somebody can open the door for those, it's like, holy, it's like going from darkness to light. All of a sudden you see, wow, there's a whole world out there, and all I saw before was these 4 walls. And so that's why I said this was really exciting, a life-changing experience for me. Here's one list of projects. Dance club, recreation for the Sherwood Mall. We got together, we organized things with the Sherwood Mall, and we had a whole sort of a community fun event in the spring out in the parking lot. We did that one year. Nightclub was another idea. Outdoor furniture, weight room. Choose 3 projects and complete a point form 4 pros and cons for each. Choose 1 project and describe in 2 paragraphs why you would want to do this and what's personally meaningful to you. How should we organize this class for the remainder of the semester? What will be most productive for the whole class? Advertising and publicity. We started the school store. It hadn't been started, so we got that going. We had carpenters come in. We had the cabinets all built. One student came to school one day with a cash register under his arm because he got a good deal on it. We hadn't even discussed that yet. And so, like, the buy-in and the ideas, they knew that anything they did would be okay because they knew where we were going and their hearts were in it. With this thing I mentioned with Vic Heward and setting up the daycare, we had no funding for it. And so we wrote a letter, and the kids did petition with the students in the school. They had 85% of the students in the school supported this. And they sent a letter to the Minister of Social Services. And he said, well, you know, we've got lots of people who want this and want daycare set up, and we just don't have the money for it. But we will have your name on the list when we do have money for it. And lo and behold, before the end of that semester, there was money available. And I think part of it was the fact that the kids were into it, the families were into it. Another project we did was the city of Regina had been trying for years to put a skate park into one of the areas of the city with no success because families would come forward and say, we don't want one of those things in our neighborhood. All we're going to get is a bunch of graffiti. We don't want that. So we got a hold of City Hall and they said, oh, never thought about having kids involved with this. So the whole idea of having kids involved was new to so many people. But we got that skate park built, and we did it with Riffle. We had them on board as well. And the city was just totally amazed that we could get that. In fact, the community supported it and wrote letters or attended meetings or whatever, fundraisers to do this. We did, that one was called the Lake Ridge Sport Park, and we also created, the kids figured they should have a parking lot at the school, and there wasn't one. So we got a parking lot built. We did an annual project of fun events where there would be tables and there would be all kinds of activities going on the weekend before the long weekend in May. So those are some of the things that students did who were in grade 10 was the first group, and then grade 11 and 12 was the second group. And it was amazing to me what they accomplished, and really it was all about choice. And that whole idea, as I said at the beginning, this collaborative, interactive learning, teaching is actually a lifestyle. To collaborate with people, to find out where they're coming from, to find out what's going to work for them, to accept what they've got to say, to work together, to find common solutions, is an amazingly powerful way to motivate students and not just students. I mean, how many of us like to have somebody else telling us what we have to do and no choice? Like that just shuts down our whole sense of value. And to be able to open those doors just means that everybody can come forward with a whole lot more energy and productivity.
So you said that, sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Like you said at the start that, you know, everyone tries to do their best every day.
Yes.
And as much as they can.
Right.
What if there's a group of students who you think can achieve more than their choices that they're giving, right?
Mm-hmm.
The example I'm going to give, so in the class I'm teaching, there's 4 teams and they're all doing the same project.
Yeah.
So they get to choose how they're doing that project. And every 2 weeks they show their progress in front of their class.
Okay.
And some groups are keeners and they're doing way more.
Right.
And some groups who I would think are really exceptional students
Mm-hmm.
are doing like the bare minimum. So, or I think they're doing the bare minimum. I don't know if they are, because maybe they're just, that's all they can do because
Yeah.
of